a month. I can't do that. I'm not working. I'm on welfare. I've got no disposable cash. They'll say, well, can you pay $25 a month? They want what they want is just something coming back. They don't want to see people just ignoring their travel loan, because if they don't hear anything back from the refugee, what they'll do is send it to collections, and then it'll stay on the record, and then they'll try to get a home or a college loan or something like that. 5 years down the line, they're like, oh shoot, I forgot about that travel loan. So it's what we always tell refugees is just try to pay something back, or at least call them and tell them, give me 3 months.
What percentage of it is paid back?
I don't know. We don't get involved in the repayment part. We just give them the information, tell them how to repay it, tell them if they move, make sure they tell the organization about, you need to pay this back.
I think that's one issue that people who've worked in refugees for years or whatever, until recently, I never knew that they ever had to pay anything back, that there was such a thing as a loan.
Yeah.
That was like...
They land here and
it was such a shock. I mean,
it's like they're already in debt.
People don't have money at the end of the month for food, and how are they thinking they're going to get paid back or whatever? So
yeah, it's always been a facet of refugee resettlement, the travel loan. Yeah. And I think, from what I understand, they do a pretty good job getting it paid back. They really, overseas, they hammer it home that it's important to pay it back. It's a revolving fund, so it's like the money goes back. It allows other refugees to travel. So, and refugee resettlement is a very expensive proposition, getting somebody from, Bhutan to here. And, resettlement agents or resettlement countries are willing to do, so much, like set up refugee resettlement programs, have case managers, give them direct assistance, but, that part's like, that's too much. So it's like they want the refugees to sort of own sort of this process, and that's one of the ways that they do it.
Excuse me.
Yep.
Did you say it is or it is not interest-bearing?
No, there's no interest on it.
There's no interest.
Once it gets to the collection agency, it's a little dicey. Those aren't very friendly people. So it's like if they stick with, say, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops or Church World Service or Lutheran Immigration Services, if they're the collection people, everything's going to be fine. Once it gets to the collection agency, then you got major headaches. Okay. But it only get there if the voluntary agency doesn't hear from them or loses track of them. Okay, I'll talk real quickly about just some of the major populations we're seeing. I'm going to give these out here. This is a quick summary sheet of our resettlement program. I'll pass that around. Thank you. And on the back of this, you can see, just put some stats and numbers. So our refugee arrival projections for 2013 for the United States. You'll see that our admission ceiling for the United States is 70,000 for this fiscal year. And then underneath I have the refugee admissions projected for Rochester, New York. And that's a lot less than 70,000. It's about 750 for this fiscal year. I did this a while ago, and I think we'll probably end up with less than that. But you can see on our major populations that we're expecting this year, and they're pretty much the same as we've experienced the past 4 or 5 years. Our Bhutanese, that's our largest population. Okay. And followed by Somalis, Burmese, the various Burmese ethnicities like the Karen, the Chen, the Kachin, Cubans, we resettled a lot of Cubans, Iraqis, and sort of a scattering of other African cases like folks from Burundi, Sudan, Congo, Ethiopia, Eritrea. And all told, we generally resettle about 12 different nationalities every year, but 90% of our caseload, probably 95% of our caseload, is that top 5 of Bhutanese, Burmese, Somalis, and Iraqis. Okay.
Why are the Bhutanese here? I mean, why are they refugees? I didn't know it was happening in the country.
Bhutanese are an interesting case. You don't hear a lot about them. In fact, what you hear about Bhutan is that it's heaven on earth, and everybody's happy.
It's in the Himalayas, right?
Yeah. It's a small Himalayan country, but the Bhutanese that we see are an ethnic minority within that country, and they migrated from Nepal over 100 years ago, and they settled in the southern part of Bhutan were farmers. Everything was fine. And then I think in the 80s, the Bhutanese king established, what was it called? One country, one people, or something like that. This is their new direction. And it was designed to, have a very uniform concept of their country. And part of that was those ethnic minority folks from Nepal that have been living in our country for 100 years. We got to get rid of them. So they weren't, slowly by slowly, they were doing things like outlawing their use of the Nepali language in the schools down there, dress, culture, all sorts of things. They didn't. If people didn't have any sort of documentation of their citizenship in Bhutan, which a lot of them did not, even though they'd been living there for decades, they basically were forced out of their homes. Some of it was sort of passive, like you don't have papers, you don't own this home, you've got 5 days to get out. And some of it was violent. So there was torture, there was torture of leaders. There was a violent crackdown of the protests. So these folks left en masse to Nepal, to about 7 or 8 different camps there. And they've been there, were there a good long time, because the Bhutanese got there with, of course, they were trying to repatriate them for years, and they were trying to work with the Bhutanese government, please take these people back, and it seemed like they were going to do it, but in the end they just figured they're playing games, they're really not going to do this. So that's why they ended up in the third country resettlement.
Okay.
Part. But there's a lot of good stuff online about the Bhutanese and their road to becoming refugees and why they're refugees. In this handout I gave you, under web links there's something, there's the top one, the Center for Applied Linguistics. That's really great. They have what they call refugee backgrounders. And they, for a lot of refugee groups, they put together these backgrounders. It talks about the ethnic group, why they're refugees, their cultural, their history, their education, their language capacity, their religion, and all that stuff. So it's really good way to get a quick summary of the different refugee groups that are out there these days.
Can you answer, I don't know if this is off your subject or too quick or too long of an answer, but 30 years ago, parishes used to be involved in refugee resettlement. I've always been interested, why did that stop and where did that change? Because the numbers became too large. 30 years ago, people were coming from Vietnam and Cambodia, and all of our parishes took families kind of thing or whatever. But I don't see that exists at all in any.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that right
sorry.
next. That's a good segue. So once refugees get through all that process, they get assigned. They come to places like Rochester, Buffalo, anywhere in the United States. They're going to need sponsorship, and sponsorship now has evolved. Sponsorship now is located at an agency, a resettlement agency recognized by the Department of State to resettle refugees. So CFC, Catholic Family Center, is a sponsor. Now back in the day, you used to have sponsors and co-sponsors, parish sponsors, friend sponsors. They've done away with all that. It's like there's one sponsor, and it's the agency. Here it's CFC. From Syracuse, there's 2 agencies.
Is it because the numbers became so large?
Well, it's as you remember, it used to be refugees would come, they'd be met by the church group at the airport and maybe somebody from the agency. And then the person from the agency would make introductions and then, see you later, good luck with that group.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be okay. But part of it was the numbers. Part of it was the Department of State's drive to make refugee resettlement a more professional social work venture instead of just, leaving it to the churches and the congregations. And I think when I started in 1998, it was still very much centered around congregations, church support, volunteers. And as a case manager, I would just spend my day talking to volunteers and seeing what they were doing with refugees, doing my checklist. But we didn't really have a lot of direct connection. And part of it was because it was funded so poorly. So they didn't fund it enough that you could have the staff that we have now. So it's always been thought of this public-private partnership. The Department of State talks about that a lot. It's a public-private partnership. You've got to have not only professional agencies, but you have to have in-kind support. You have to have volunteers. You want to get churches involved. But the idea of a church sponsor is no longer something that the Department of State recognizes. They still tell us, get folks involved. It's very important to get other entities involved in this. It's a big venture. Try to do it alone as an agency, it's just not going to work. But the idea that a church signs and says, we're going to resettle this refugee, they don't do that anymore. It's a lot to ask. And I think cases were getting more complicated. It's one thing to resettle a family out of the former Soviet Union or Bosnia or even Vietnam to some extent that has some context for living in a Western culture. But this, as the profile changed of refugees, and you're getting more rural refugees or refugees that have lived, in far parts of the world and have no context for that. It was a lot to ask. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we're asking churches to do later, but that's basically where it's at right now.
Okay, about 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. I'm moving very quickly along. I'm going to go through quickly what CFC does as a resettlement agency. We, as a resettlement agency, have to provide what they call the core services of resettlement, and those are listed on the front here of that summary. And as you can see, it's not a whole lot. What the core settlement is, but what core settlement or core services are the Department of State wants us to provide some basic support and facilitate refugees' entrance into other community service providers. So what we try to do is, once we welcome them off the plane, is get them into their home. We work with landlords and other folks in the city to get refugees into apartments that are their own, that they rent themselves. We work with an organization called Saints Place out of St. Louis Parish in Pittsburgh that does all the home setups, meaning they collect the furnishings, the beds, tables, chairs, everything the refugee needs, and then when we say a family's arriving, they go fill the house, which is fantastic. We have 90 days with our refugee clients to do core services and to do resettlement. It's not a long time. So what we're trying to do, again, is to get them on solid ground, give them a foundation of support, and then they go on to other agencies and other places. Like, for instance, we'll take them to the county. We'll get them food stamps, Medicaid, welfare in some instances, get them set up with public benefits. We will get them into the medical systems. We'll take them to the county for immunizations, for TB check, we'll take them, our big health partner is Rochester General Hospital, so we'll get them involved in primary health care. We will take them to the Social Security office, get them a Social Security card, a Social Security card. We will take them to the school placement center so the kids can get into school. We'll take the adults usually over to Oases, Family Learning Center, so the adults can do their ESOL stuff. We'll do a lot of time. We'll spend a lot of time on cultural orientation. We'll bring them in for, I think it's a 3 or 4 hour class on what to expect here in Rochester, like how we operate, how the transportation system operates, what are expectations as far as public hygiene, public safety, financial matters, managing your budget. We do our intake, of course, so we can do a needs assessment. We can find out what languages they speak, what are their needs, what are the special needs that they may have. And we come up with our service plan, which is usually deliver core services, but if there's something additional, like if we have a pregnant woman and may want some additional care at the Women's Center, or maybe they need to go over to WIC, or if they have mental health issues, maybe they need a referral over to our own clinic or to RGH. They have developmental disabilities, over to DDSO. So we're going to do that case management care coordination for 90 days. And we have other programs at CFC that help refugees. We have employment programs. and they'll help refugees get employed and do all their work prep. We call it e-prep. It's a class where they learn about how to work in the U.S., what are the expectations of U.S. employers. We can work with those folks for up to 5 years with employment. We have what we call a transitional support program, which helps refugees that are beyond their initial 90-day period if they have problems with anything from housing to public benefits.
I'm sorry, what was that called?
It's called a transitional support program.
And that's through CFC?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
It's like an ombudsman, or?
Well, it's resettlement is very intense. It takes a lot of hand holding. So we have right now we have 7 case managers supported by 2 case aides and a housing coordinator and a couple other folks involved in resettlement. So there's a lot of help around resettlement because we have to do a lot in a short amount of time. With transitional supports, I have 1 case manager for every other refugee that comes through. So it's a really small program. And if a refugee comes in and says, you know what, I lost my benefits, I missed a letter, CSS cut me off, can you get me back on? What she's going to do is say, yes, I'll help you fill out the application. Now, you have to go down to St. Paul, you have to wait in line, you have to do this. Because she can't do too much hand-holding as far as getting them through that process because her caseload's too big. So she does a lot of consultations, she does a lot of referrals, she does assistance mostly in the office. Because if she did all that out-of-the-office stuff, she would collapse in exhaustion. And of course, we'd make that bigger if we had the finances and resources to do that, but we only have a small amount of resources to plug into that sort of direction. We have immigration assistance too, so which is changing lately for us. In past years, we've been very focused on getting refugees green cards, and but the state support that was helping us do that got cut off. So now that the state said, no, we want you to do citizenship, so now we're doing citizenship. And I know you had a question, or you sent me a question about refugees and their status, and I should have said that before, but let me just go through that really quick. When refugees first come in, they're again admitted legally to the U.S., and they'll have they'll have an I-94. The I-94 is a little card like not this big. It's cardboard. And when they get off the plane, they go through processing with DHS, Homeland Security folks, and they'll give them an I-94. It says, you're admitted as a refugee for an indefinite amount of time, work authorized. And here's your alien number. And so with that card, they can go on to get the Social Security card or other things. And usually they'll get, refugees will get an EAD in the mail a couple weeks after they arrive. An EAD is an employment authorization document. And it's a nice laminated card from Homeland Security. It's got their picture on it and their biometric fingerprint. And I think it's valid for a year. But it's really, it doesn't give them employment authorization. They are employment authorized by dint of being a refugee. But it does give them valid photo ID, which is nice. And after a refugee's been here for a year, they can apply for a green card. And in fact, the law is that they have to apply for a green card after a year. Now, there's no punishment or no ramifications if they don't. And a lot of refugees don't because maybe it's complicated or maybe they can't figure out the application. But some folks get it done soon, some folks don't. But the law says that they have to get this done. There's been some legislation. They tried to put it in the comprehensive immigration reform bill, but didn't go through, that refugees would just get green cards when they got here. That would make sense, but to somebody in Washington, it doesn't make sense. I'm not going to do it. So after they've been here for 5 years, they can apply for citizenship if they so desire. There's no law about that. They can become citizens. They don't have to become citizens. So, but they can if they want to. If they want to become citizens, they have to know English. They have to pass the English exam. Of course, fill out an application. Pass the civics exam, and that we do at Catholic Family Center. We can get them through all that process at CFC, as long as they speak English.
That's the prep then, because for the rest they have to go to Buffalo, right?
Yeah, we do. We help them with the application at CFC. We'll do all the screening, make sure there's no problems with applying for citizenship. We'll put the package together. We'll give them resources to study for the exam. But once the application goes in, then they have to go back and forth to Buffalo a couple of times to do the exam, get the biometrics, And then if all that passes, they come and they have a nice naturalization ceremony here, usually in the federal building. Okay, I'm just about out of time, aren't I? Is there anything I didn't cover? Oh, really quick, I just want to say this. It'll take 2 minutes.
Okay.
Also on the back of that sheet, I put all these collaborative partners down. And these are just a few of the folks that we work with. Because as I said before, refugee resettlement doesn't get done just at CFC. We are sort of the portal, the bridge by which refugees come into the community. But it doesn't work if the community's not into it. And we wouldn't be able to bring in 700 refugees if we didn't have really strong community partners, which we do. We've always had a very welcoming community, whether it's churches, individual volunteers, or the service providers we work with. We have a great community here for refugee resettlement, and it's because the community welcomes them. And I know there's people I'm looking at right now that have been involved in refugee resettlement and helping refugees for years and years. It's a great initiative. It's a great mission for churches, and we learn a lot by working with refugees. They teach us a lot about ourselves, about perseverance and hope. And I think it's a challenge working with refugees. There's language, there's cultural issues, but the rewards are terrific. And that's why people like Pat and Mike, myself, Karen, we've been doing this for a long time, and we love doing it. So since I'm out of time and I have to stop talking, Karen's getting up, I'll just stop. But if you have questions afterwards, I'll stick around for a bit, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. And our next speaker is Mike Boucher, who I'm going to let introduce himself. I think most of us recognize his face from his beautiful homilies.